Anime. You all know it, you all hope, I assume you all love it, with many different genres of anime, just like how there are different genres of movies and shows. But when you think of anime, some people like to think of who is the strongest character in anime and manga respectively, or in some cases what ends up happening is more anime adjacent things like Masadaverse or Umineko, which, well, technically have anime adaptations, often do go into things like light novels or games or of the sort, but we will count those things today. But regardless, what would happen if we take another very popular and very commonly considered powerful character and put him against anime? Could Godzilla solo anime and its strongest contenders, or what people think are the strongest contenders on anime? And by that I mean, maybe the characters I mentioned today are not the most definitively strongest characters in anime, but these are the characters most commonly listed and ranked if you look online to see which are the strongest. And most of the time, it's not terrible. We're obviously not going to be covering things like Saitama, who's obviously not one of the strongest ones. When you mention these higher, more obscure verses, which we'll get into a little bit later, they commonly are at least in the contention for being the strongest in anime, especially since a lot of anime isn't that strong, honestly. Obviously, there's a lot of strong ones, but for every strong one, there's every street-tiered romance anime. So, obviously won't be covering literally every single anime. I'll be sticking with some of the most common and popular characters listed in anime that are often shown and considered to have the most impressive feats. And we will be using the composite version of the King of the Monster. That's right, the composite version. So anything is on the table, from Marvel to Godzilla and Hell to Ultima to whatever you can think of that would be canon or more, I should say, official to the King of the Monsters wide catalog of movies, anime, shows, and so on. First, let's start with Godzilla, scaling ends, and where he should scale to on the tiering system. I'll be going more into hacks on a later section of the video when we're more doing hacks comparisons between the characters that I mentioned later on. Godzilla's highest scaling ends can come from a couple of things. The most common and most blatant one is the 616, Godzilla Destroys the Marvel Universe, something confirmed to be canon to the wider 616 canon. Either it be the Godzilla vs. Thor book and the Destroys the Marvel Universe, both things we will be using in the run. It's not only confirmed that he fights All-Father Thor, one-shots base Thor is compared to Galactus. All of these characters in some way, shape, or form scale to things like Eternity. Either it be Thor scaling to Null, who's directly said to be a threat to Eternity, Hulk breaking the chains of the first firmament, which can contain Eternity, who Hulk and Thor are consistently relative, so on, so forth. Although this would prove Godzilla would, at least in the cosmological ranking, be at Eternity level, which, while it's not at the highest point in the cosmology, it is still extremely impressive, as we'll just get into now. Something to keep in mind is that in the cosmology, Eternity is the concept of reality itself, and everything below it is simply infinitesimal to Eternity, including the Omniverse and such. As well as him and other abstracts such as the aforementioned Galactus, who Goji is compared to once again, exists in a realm higher than the Omniverse. But how strong is the Omniverse and the rest of the realms located below Eternity? To start off, even the universes are higher dimensional, with each dimension seeing the one below it as fiction. This would qualify for something such as qualitative transcendence, which is something we'll be getting into a little later. Even to a point that in all of these infinite universes, infinite dimensions and infinite dimensional spaces are said to exist once again, with each of these dimensions transcending the one below it. With the multiverse containing and superseding this already infinite dimensional, aka high hyperversal structure, and then the Omniverse, which is beyond the multiverse and infinite multiverses in its entirety. Beyond the normal universe, multiverse, and omniverse, we have something called the superflow, the highest point in reality that transcends everything below it. And then we have the neutral zone, which is at the edge of eternity itself and transcends the superflow, being the edge of all things. And then finally, we get to eternity himself, who sees everything else that we just mentioned as simply infinitesimal specks of his power. In conclusion, Godzilla would be either extremely high into baseline outer versal or flat out high outer versal. It would be hard to argue higher, since beyond this is something called the outside, which is the next layer in the cosmology, which is something just beyond eternity's reach entirety. Though it's definitely possible as the issues go on, Godzilla does get higher end scaling. These high tier characters that Godzilla is fighting right now generally cap at kind of eternity tier. Maybe once again they can go a little bit higher, but it wouldn't be enough to significantly affect Godzilla's scaling, and consistently this is where they should cap at in the realms of the cosmology. Eternity is just like kind of the big guy that like all these like higher tier heroes kind of scale to for their cosmology scaling, and that's why Marvel is considered, even for characters like Thor and Hulk, are like such a strong verse. Which again, Godzilla giving belt to ass to these characters is enough proof on why he's so strong. And this is also not considering the fact that even with some funny statements he might scale to the House of Ideas, or Marvel Godzilla being equal to Showa, who Heisei is many times stronger than and can grow infinitely stronger than his previous self. We also have things like D&D and Twin Peaks Godzilla, both things like D&D and Twin Peaks transcending the dimensionality concepts, geometry, etc. in their verse, which both contain infinite dimensions and infinite dimensional spaces and such. So this would add consistency for outer versal, with these cosmologies arguably getting higher as such. And I'll just more so leave these links in the description if you want to go check out Twin Peaks and D&D, as they are extremely strong cosmologies that Godzilla does have some form of scaling to. And this is where generally he caps at, in those pretty high into baseline outer tiers to high outer versal. It's definitely possible he can get stronger with time, especially if he scales to the higher layers of the Marvel cosmology. But right now, I think infinite layers into outer versal or high outer versal is fine, and is generally enough for what we're going to be seeing in this video. So let's start us off. We're going to start off with the more easier to decide ones that don't need much explanation. And then as we get on, we'll go into verses that need a lot more explanation and time to see how Godzilla would fare in them. First, we're going to start with Xeno. Xeno realistically, at best, is low complex multiversal off of transcending the DB cosmology, which at bare minimum is a 4D structure. But if you want to say Xeno and on like CC Goku, for example, is outer, which is fine, even with like Comp Dragon Ball being outer, Godzilla would still not only be stronger, he can grow infinitely strong with his infinite spiral heat ray each time it's shot. And for people kind of questioning with things like Hakai, Godzilla can't really be erased either, as stated in a guidebook, so that's not gonna work. Next is Madoka from Madoka Magica. Madoka's best scaling is also really simple. She's able to reform the multiverse, which contains infinite witches, so an infinite 4D construct. Impressive, but multi-plus is no match for someone who simply transcends the confines of dimensions at a bare minimum. Anti-Spiral. So Anti-Spiral is also just kind of pretty simple to scale. He should be around 11th dimensional at best. It's pretty verbatim stated, actually, that these dimensions exist within the cosmology, which Anti-Spiral is above. There is some arguable things higher, like 25th dimensional or maybe even infinite dimensional, but either way, the point still stands that he is bound by dimensionality, while Godzilla is not. It's pretty simple. To kind of put it in an analogy, let's say Anti-Spiral is, bound by chains, and he can't break through those chains. Godzilla would see those chains as a storybook to him, and then take a shit on it. If that kind of puts you the difference between a being who caps at not even infinite dimensional to a being who transcends dimensionality flat out. Finally, for last of our more easier to decide picks, we have GER. or Golden Experience Requiem. JoJo's isn't even 4D, but he's kind of a hacks merchant. So ignoring the fact that Godzilla would simply see him as infinitesimal, GAR does have a pretty good form of casualty manipulation that allows him to revert the opponent's action back to 0 and make them die an infinite number of times. The problem is not only does Godzilla have casualty manipulation via Ultima, he was able to just simply counter it, he is immune to any paradox, which GER is a paradox by definition, meaning GER is not really a problem for him, ignoring the fact that Godzilla just one-shots. Alright, let's get into the verses I think a lot of people are gonna either know if you've seen these kind of videos, and first is gonna be Yumeneko. First, and we're primarily going to be talking about Featherine. Featherine's kind of you may not know Yumeneko, but you probably know Featherine. You've probably seen her here and there. I think if I showed a picture of her, I think most power skills would probably recognize her, even if they don't read Yumeneko or watch it, which is completely fair. You think I didn't read or play Yumeneko before doing research for this video? So we're gonna stick with Featherine, even if once again she's not necessarily the absolute strongest person in the verse. She still scales to the cosmology to a point where it doesn't really matter if people stronger than her are only a tier above her, really, in kind of dimensionality. So how Featherine is presented is she's more in her own kind of domain, where she's the author of the verse and is pretty much transcended to, or at the very least is above this is the cosmology. It's pretty much kind of vague with a lot of these scans. Some of these scans are either using pretty vague language, or using analogies that don't really make sense in the context of being a higher dimensional being. But let's just get into the cosmology. The human realm is not really a factor in terms of just pure scaling. It's more just serves as an explanation basis for a lot of the higher tier realms within the verse. The human realm itself is a 3-dimensional plane. It's pretty simple. But we do know the fact that higher dimensions do exist. There are 4D realms within this cosmology, which makes sense considering there's timeless realms as well. So already there's 4D. But then we get into the witch's domain. The witch's domain is described as a higher plane than the human one. So either it's just higher in the 4th dimensional or 5th dimensional. You can argue consistent as the concept of time has trouble existing or doesn't exist at all in this realm, and you need to transcend the human world to reach the witch's one. This is what I said before about qualitative transcendence. There's an infinite hierarchy, like a staircase as is presented within the story. Now this hierarchy, the problem with it is that even though there's an infinite hierarchy, this hierarchy is never described as each layer seeing the one below it as infinitesimal to the one above it. We know things like dreams are higher dimensional and they contain higher dimensional things as well, adding consistency for 5th dimensional. But you can't say this hierarchy contains each layer of dreams. There's no evidence supporting the fact that each layer in the hierarchy that supersedes the other contains these dreams, which is the main reliant for the argument. All we know is that dreams exist somewhere within this hierarchy. We know as you go up on this staircase, you get more real. Doesn't mean that you're getting more real each progressive step, just means that when you reach the top, you're higher dimensional than when you started. Since it's just very interpretation based, I think it's a little too hard to definitively say the fact to determine this is a high hyper construct, as a lot of people would say, as I don't think this would qualify for qualitative transcendence, as qualitative transcendence is something you have to see something as infinitesimal to you. Simply just being above something wouldn't qualify on its own, and it's kind of hard to say that this hierarchy would meet the requirements of that, especially with the vague wording of how dreams interact with this hierarchy. To put it in an analogy that maybe someone can easier understand, let's say you have a staircase. You know how a staircase works, each stair is slightly higher than the rest, ultimately to reach the end of the staircase. With what a qualitative transcendence would be is that the staircase is, stair 1 is infinitely low or infinitesimal to stair 2, stair 2 being on such a higher level than stair 1 that stair 1 cannot perceive stair 2 because it is infinitesimal to stair 2. Stair 2 would be 4th dimensional and stair 1 would be 3 dimensional in this context. This means stair 2 would have a qualitative transcendence over stair 1. and the cycle continues for each stair, in which there are infinite stairs of each one transcending the last. This would be a high hyperversal construct. Compare this to Yumeneko's hierarchy, who, since they don't have specification of how the dream works within context of these layers, maybe stair 1 is 1 million feet below stair 2, but if you look up, and you look closely enough, you can still see stair 2. Stair 2 does not infinitely transcend stair 1. They're both on the same 3-dimensional plane of existence. So stair 2 does not have a qualitative transcendence over stair 1. With there being infinite stairs that do follow this pattern, so while each layer is significantly above the other, they still both exist on the same dimensional plane and don't have a qualitative transcendence over the other. So in conclusion, this would just be either really kind of 5th dimensional or 6th dimensional, since you can make the argument that the overall there is at least one transcendence from the top of the stairs getting more real as you do progress the stairs. So you really can just at least argue 6th dimensional if you want to. If you want to say it's a high hyperversal construct, that's fine. It's not going to change much, as we'll get into a little later. We then get into where Featherine's avatar resides. Her library, as it's called. This is a higher realm, which seems all the lower realms as her as fiction, so 6th or 7th dimensional or outerversal, if you want to go by the aforementioned assumption of the hierarchy. Then there's the depths of oblivion, which is infinitely below the sea of quanta and is kind of a void. And finally, the creator's realm, the peak of the cosmology, which is simply transcendent of everything else, so either 8th and 9th dimensional, or a couple layers in outerversal. So either way, how you look at it, Featherine is not winning based on outscaling. But what about hacks? Featherine is known for her plot and narrative hacks, something she has displayed quite evidently and where her other hacks reside of them. They all reside on her ability to manipulate the story, as she pleases and decide the outcomes of events within the story. That's why she's considered a creator, because she's really good at writing the story, and she does this often. That's why her avatar exists within a library that contains all the stories that she's written. The problem with this is Godzilla can counter this. They say that Godzilla listed all the narratives in the House of Ideas thrown at him. If you don't know what the House of Ideas is, it's the birthplace of all the infinite stories within Marvel, where the one above all resides, who is seen as the literal writers of Marvel, even being directly shown to be the writer Jack Kirby once. Not only that, Ultima also arguably has narrative hacks as well, so Godzilla does just counteract Featherine's main hacks, which isn't good for her whatsoever. Next, let's go into Rimuru and therefore Tensura's cosmology. Sadly, Rimuru also would be capping at those 5th to 6th dimensional ranges of power. As you know, via Chloe, a time traveler, there is infinite time, as she dies an infinite number of timelines and she's reset an infinite number of times. Each of these timelines have its own space-time axis and space-time. Their own timeline as well does not connect to one another and is pretty evidently infinitely into 4D. While there is statements that saying that 50 dimensions exist, it doesn't necessarily qualify for 50th dimensional. This could be 50, 40 dimensions as will be just previously described, especially how we know it's more likely referring to timelines than anything. There's also realms referred to as extra-dimensional, or even existing in a higher dimensional than the infinite timelines that exist within the cosmology, with other realms and even Rimuru himself being stated to be completely devoid of space and time, with Rimuru also transcending the laws and rules of the world and is generally just superior to their cosmology. So 5th to 6th dimensional, which is all cool and dandy, but once again, as we said before, Godzilla just outscales. While Rimuru does seemingly have impressive conceptual hacks, not only does Godzilla murk Celestials who are the abstract physical embodiments of abstract concepts, also having the power of the Necrosword, which does the same thing. He also resists Wanda's hacks, in which Wanda has shown conceptual manipulation on several occasions, even erasing them, as well as weaker magic users that Wanda would upscale off of, as Marvel magic is a universal energy system, and Wanda is a peak of magic in Marvel, so she naturally scales, yet her hexes simply do nothing to the big G, and Marvel's conceptual hexes are far above Tensura's. For people concerned Rimuru could also just copy Godzilla, ignoring the stat difference, Godzilla has not only fought and beat not only several copies of himself in the Heisei area, such as Space Godzilla, who's consistently draining his energy while amping himself with infinite energy. Their fights are Biolante or Destroyer absorbing his DNA, with infinite evolution, infinite potential, and infinite adaptation. Godzilla's growth simply surpassed this, And even if Rimuru could perfectly copy Godzilla with a single atomic breath, Godzilla would just grow infinitely stronger. So let's go into Anos. To cover something quickly, non-duality or trans-duality don't get to outer on their own. This gives him nothing but hacks. Non-duality and trans-duality haven't been outer for years. Please stop saying that. Let's get into his actual cosmology, which Anos is capable of destroying the Silver Sea. So let's go into the cosmology. Something to note is that in however you say this, worlds equal universes in this cosmology. So anytime you reference the world, it means the universe. The worlds are infinite size, and space is distorted in each world, having their own space-time continuum, with infinite of these worlds existing within the multiverse, meaning the multiverse is infinite into 4D. With the Silver Sea itself containing is also a space-time continuum containing these lower space-times. The Silver Sea is a aforementioned multiverse containing infinite of these universes. The Silver Sea has over 99 plus layers, which each layer containing infinite of these 4D works, and while each layer in the sea is infinite, nothing is ever stated to be transcendent of each other layer. They're higher, they're stronger, maybe in another dimension as said, but nothing specifically calls them being transcended over one another or anything along those lines of wording. So it would just be 99 layers into infinite 4D. While Anos is above this, not even 5D, it's not even said he transcends it, he just can destroy it or affect it greatly. Meaning, once again, Anos doesn't really compare to Godzilla in this. And now we have another big name, Hajin, or some of you might know it, the Masadaverse. Masadaverse is quite large, and so I'm going to leave out a lot of these smaller realms which don't really factor into the scaling of the character. Hajin is consistently referenced as the strongest god, he can kill any of them with ease, stats are above everyone else's, so on and so forth. He just resides at the peak of the cosmology, above everything else. You get the idea. Bare minimum, we know that these gods transcend concepts without specification. This would be 5D without any further context, as it's transcending concepts without further specification just transcend space and time, which without the proper context would simply be fifth dimensional. But besides that, the cosmos has an infinite multiverse, which is infinite in size and contains infinite universes, which are infinite in size, so infinite 4D. Weaker characters with certain techniques are already transcendent to the multiverse and its laws, so 5D. With other spaces being applied, you need to transcend and be higher dimensional to this fifth dimensional structure to reach it, so 6th dimensional. This is where then the singularity, which other characters can ascend past, above this realm, so 7th dimensional. We then have an infinite hierarchy with the holes, but still never shows like qualitative transcendence, just like infinite 7D structure in this case, with infinite holes and infinite layers, so 2 layers in the infinite 7D. Once again, the problem of no transcendence being ever showed for these holes is a problem. We then have realms transcending the singularity, so 8th dimensional, and it's consistently referenced as a transcendent realm, but to back all this up, it's still called dimensional, so it'd be very hard to argue outerversal when it's still called dimensional and bound by dimensionality. And finally, the gods transcend all of this, so 9th dimensional, and even stronger gods exist in a higher dimensional realm than the lower gods, so 10th dimensional. Then we have Naruto, who sees the rest of versus fiction to her, except for Hajin, who was the peak of the gods, so 11D. Once again, 11th dimensional and still bound by dimensionality. Even if you want to say this, we're getting 11 layers in outer, that's still below Godzilla. That's the problem. And even if Hajin doesn't have any powerful hacks to assert him to simply beat Godzilla, or any hacks that Godzilla can't really counter. Finally, I've been saying, after all this research, no one's really putting up a fight against the Big G-Man. I've been saying Godzilla pretty much no-diffs all these guys, so let's talk about something I think has the potential to change that. Persona or Shin Megami Tensei. Most of you probably know it as Persona. Let's use the most popular game in the franchise, Persona 5, and the main protagonist from that, Joker or Ren Animanga. Ren Animanga. So let's just get right into the cosmology, shall we? The physical universe already has infinite worlds with infinite spacetimes and parallel dimensions containing these spacetimes with infinite possibilities and timelines. Each possibility, even if it doesn't happen, will become its own reality with its own spacetime, consistently infinitely fourth-dimensional. Will this world be considering mere data to higher realms, even in this realm all concepts are considered meaningless? A 5D feat, so the human world is multi-plus, or maybe even 5D. Next, we go into the vortex world, a world transcendent to the human or physical world beyond all of time and space, as is infinite in size. Each vortex world being a cosmological sphere with another one in it and going on infinitely. Unlike other verses which I mentioned before don't specify that each of these layers transcend one another, it is specifically called out that each layer sees the lower one as infinitesimal to it. This is a high hyperversal structure. We then have the expanse, a transcendent world being the entire conceptual idea of being above the entire conceptual ideas of space and time. This should be low outerversal to outerversal. This is consistent as the lower demons in the lower realms, while this realm is described to be where the true forms exist, with there being several expanses. Outer is consistent for these realms in Persona with things like the Velvet Room, which is also transcendent to the human realm and vortex worlds, being beyond the concept of space and time entirely, and how you achieve going here is by transcending these lower realms. Keep in mind, even at the start of his journey, Joker can casually enter this realm. We then have the collective unconscious, which is directly compared to the real-life philosophical concept of this, with it also being expanded upon more. The collective unconscious is infinite in size and contains several other infinitely sized transcendent layers of each other, which each one is stating even the most basic Persona users can ascend infinitely into the collective unconsciousness to simply boost their ego. This is consistent as considering it's pretty much shown to be the exact same thing as the one Carl Jung proposed. It is a realm beyond all concepts of numerical values, space, time, dimensions, and set of infinity existing as archetypes. The collective unconsciousness, as before we described the collective consciousness, or as most of you know it, the metaverse and Mentos, a parallel world to this, as there is no true real world and simply a subjective universe holding infinite potential. There's also infinite of these collective unconsciousnesses, already infinitely into outerversal, if not high outerversal already. But we're not done. We also have Azulath. Azulath is a world of pure divinity transcending everything else and sees the rest of the cosmology as fiction, seeing it as just an allusion to this higher realm, and there are even higher beings who see this as fiction and illusion as well, with Azulath having several layers that will infinite in size transcending the other. Joker scales to this, not only trend off of downscaling the other casts in their game since they have crossed over and fought alongside each other, with them fighting things like True Form Nyx, who is an absolute being who is in the deepest depths of the cosmology and would have corrupted all if not stopped among the SSEES, with his own bosses such as Yaldabaoth, who is going to merge the cosmology, yet Joker defeats him. This is the first time in this video that we have presented someone as pretty much the same tier as Composite Godzilla, maybe a little bit higher, but for the sake of it, let's cap them both at the same tier, since I haven't really got to talk about other Godzilla's hacks yet. And these hacks come down to a lot of these guys counting each other. Joker has shown the ability to absorb and use souls to fight. Godzilla considers souls and spirits puny and can possess multiple of them at once. The aforementioned Yaldabaoth can manipulate and hold power over concepts, who Godzilla beats up. Godzilla consistently beats up his own conceptual enemies, is conceptual himself, and resists Wanda's conceptual hacks as mentioned before. Godzilla can not only resist the narrative of the House of Ideas, but can manipulate the narrative itself with Ultima. Joker can literally steal his narrative of his character back just because he felt like it. Ren has the ability to change fate and alter fate at his will and defy it. Godzilla is immune to even fate destroying or erasing him and can only die if he chooses to, as well as fighting Destroy, who can cut through fate. Ren can manipulate infinite possibilities via the wild card. Godzilla can negate Wanda's hexes, which consistently manipulate possibilities on an infinite scale. Ren is not only immune to death hacks himself, literally killing death, He has several insta-kill abilities and can heal himself when needed, is immune to erasure and just ignores it. Godzilla is consistently depicted as immortal, can regen back from a single cell, has true forms of pure energy or even higher dimensional ones, and cannot be killed by any physical means unless he kills himself. And yeah, funnily enough, both have killed the embodiments of death in their respective verses. Ren has several skills that attack the mind, make the opponent feel different feelings, and Godzilla has consistently resisted such mind hacks. Joker has several personas that can mess with space and time. Godzilla has fought several opponents such as Space and Destroyer who have space and time hacks and can destroy it. Joker can manipulate reality via cognition and his desires, allowing him to rewrite, erase things, create palaces between universes, and can warp and control it. Godzilla has resisted Wanda's reality warping before. Ren can bypass her ability with self-negation spells. Godzilla can bypass her ability even when his opponents regenerate on the cellular level, and attack on a subatomic level with his atomic breath, Godzilla resisting these same attacks on himself. Joker and Godzilla both casually kill a casual and non-physical and invulnerable enemies. Both can negate the other's forms of immortality, either they be non-physical regen, undead, immortality, or invulnerable. However, there is two big factors in this fight that I think determine the winner. And that's firstly, their growth factor. Persona users can grow stronger mid-fight if faced with the threat of death or loss of loved ones, gaining the entirely new powers and abilities they could never access before, to the point it allows characters who would have previously beat their asses. The mere presence of them causes the same opponent to fall over with such disbelief, just as he's never felt such overwhelmed before. Persona users can grow so strong, someone who is erasing them from existence and is ontologically superior to them, they will themselves back and one-shot this person. Or even go so strong, they go from a whole group of losing to the physical lower dimensional avatar to ascending to a higher dimensional and beating up the higher dimensional true form of Nyx. Godzilla has grown to the point of gaining entirely new attacks and beams. He can grow so strong, opponents who absorbed infinite energies and were absorbing his infinite energy grow so strong that they would simply die trying to absorb his power. Godzilla can grow past beings with infinite evolution potential and no limits. He can grow himself infinitely with his infinite spiral heat ray. With Godzilla Inherited, he can do anything with the ability to simply grow, with even the paradox of the omnipotence paradox being used in reference with the rock analogy, simply that Godzilla will just lift the rock even if it's unliftable to him. The difference is simple. Godzilla can grow past a lot, even infinitely stronger in mere moments with a single attack and against impossible odds. But Godzilla has never shown the ability to grow to a point where he goes higher dimensional, or just wills himself back from attacks from a higher dimensional being. Godzilla somewhat shows it in Godzilla in Hell, but the problem with this is it takes not only a course of a longer period of time, unlike Persona users who just do it instantly because they fucking feel like it. There's also almighty attacks. Almighty attacks are simply attacks that bypass everything. Either they warp reality, bend the laws of the universe, they bypass any resistance or negation on a conceptual level. This is pretty much the perfect way to end the King of the Monsters. Godzilla has bypassed immunities, but never to an absolute degree like this. Joker has also just shown these kind of extreme feats, and more so Persona in general has, more so than Godzilla. Well, only a couple of versions of Godzilla are really powerful enough to be put into comp Godzilla. Even though Godzilla has a lot of versions, a lot of them are really not that strong. Only things like Marvel Godzilla, the lesser D&D stuff, and Twin Peaks, Ultima maybe, Heisei, Showa, that kind of stuff. Persona, these kind of cosmological gods are literally really consistently getting beat up by all these Persona users, including Joker himself, and Joker scales to most of these other Persona users, maybe to a lesser degree, but he should still be able to beat up the other gods they face. Overall, Godzilla does extremely well against anime, and probably solos 99% of it, especially since that most of that 95% is from street level things or things not even above planetary. The only thing is that he's faced with the bullshit of Persona scaling, which is just as bad as these other high verses like Marvel and such, maybe to a lesser degree, but it comes to the fact Godzilla doesn't really scale to the absolute peak of Marvel. I think if he did, he could more so outscale Persona, but since he doesn't, I think Persona definitely has a good chance to win. I could see it going either way. I would be fine if he said Godzilla wins. It's a very interpretation-based fight, but I would personally lean more to Joker from Persona than anything. But thank you for watching the video. Please like, subscribe, and share the video if you guys enjoyed this. And please join the Discord server if you want to talk. We have daily polls and such. Peace.